So if you wouldn't mind just telling us who you are first of all.
Sure. My name is Lynette Pearce. I'm an inspector in the Metropolitan Police Service. I am the Director of Training for Hostage Crisis Negotiation. And I've been in post probably for about 5 years now.
Fantastic. So can you tell us about how you were involved with Hear Us and what Hear Us do for you?
Yeah, certainly. Well, Hear Us became involved with the Hostage and Crisis Negotiation Unit in 2014, way before my time. And they take part in the national course. It's a 2-week course, and we train officers to be crisis and hostage negotiators up and down the country. And internationally, we have guests from the FBI, Scandinavia, Germany. And they came along initially to just say, well, we're Hear Us and this is our experience. And since 2014, it's really gathered traction. And they used to have a whole afternoon. I think it's now about 2 hours they get with the students. And it's all the barriers are taken down. The people from Hear Us, the group that come up from Hear Us, share their experiences, and there's no question off limits. So for the officers who are potentially going to be negotiating, talking with, communicating with people who have or are experiencing mental health illness, it's such an invaluable 2 hours. We have an opportunity for individuals to tell their stories, but the most important feature I think of the afternoon is for the officers to be able to ask any question they want to, things that you might think are embarrassing for the officer or potentially for the person they're asking. Everybody's stripped to the real rawness of the situation, and there's no cover up. And the feedback that we get from the students, initially verbally once Hear Us have left, is like that's an opportunity we would never get anywhere else. And then obviously we get the written feedback as time moves on, where the students have had a chance to reflect upon it, and invariably it comes out as one of the best modules on the course. Invariably it does. So that's the kind of immediacy with Hear Us. What happens over time is I always ask my students and those who are qualified to keep in touch, let me know what they've been up to, who they've been engaging with, and I think there's probably, a dozen stories over the last few years where people have come back and said, if I hadn't have had that input, I possibly could have gone down the wrong path, I possibly could have said something different, but I remember what a particular person said to me. I remember their experiences with the police. I remember how they said that they didn't want to be spoken to like that, or they did want to be spoken to in a certain way, and they drew on that experience. So for me, I think that's the real power of Hear Us having a real, the input is significant. It's not tokenism, it's a real significant input into the course, and we're training about 100 negotiators per year. And what happens is the negotiators, when they go back to force up and down the country, they share that experience, they share that knowledge, not just in negotiation, but in every walk of life. So for me, it has been a real journey of our involvement with Hear Us, and we're kind of going full circle now by getting that experiences back from the students.
I suppose in a wider context, how important do you think educating on mental health just in general is to the modern day police force?
Well, I think it goes much broader than just hostage and crisis negotiation. I mean, I can't give you the statistics, but I think it's broadly that 1 in 3 call has a mental health illness element to it. It's probably higher than that now. So I think it permeates through all of our work. And I don't mean that in a negative way, it's just something which is ever present. And how much training we get from it from the outset, I'm not sure. So any exposure is good exposure in my mind. And I think it's highly significant. And obviously we can talk about COVID and the effects of isolation and lockdown, but it was present before that. So it's terribly important to make sure that mental health illness has a voice, and that we listen and that we respond appropriately. And when I say appropriately, for me that means what sections of the community want and need, and what we can realistically give as well. Because there's bound to be a gap, and we need to kind of work to bridge that gap.
Okay, that's interesting. I was just wondering on that point of community, and how do you think it helps interact with members of the public, members of the communities, which the various forces police, having that extra experience from people who are just from the community?
Well, I think it normalises it. For me, for starters, I think it normalises it, that it can be anyone at any time. It could be a family member, a friend, someone that you've never come across, but that person will always be important to someone, and I think we can potentially lose sight of that. I think also, I think there's a level of fear, or there has been a level of fear from both sides, certainly from the community. What service will they get? From all public sector, not just within the police service. I think there's been a level of fear and uncertainty. Perhaps they've had a past previously bad experience, and I would appreciate that. And I think for officers themselves, some officers come into the police service and they've not experienced mental health illness. They come from all walks of life, all different geographical areas, and they may not have been exposed to just not exposed to it. So I think it's a really great opportunity to say, look, this is just another facet of human life, and an opportunity to, I don't know, just kind of interact. I certainly recall my second ever negotiation, quite a few years ago now, where a guy was initially believed just to be on at height, and they thought that he'd committed a crime, basically. He was a trapped criminal and that he didn't want to come down to police. But as soon as I started engaging, I realised really quickly that actually this was not the driver, this was not the motivation, and there was something very much more going on for him. Now, I personally think my experience with Hear Us gave me a little bit of an insight into how someone may present. So for me, it was like, okay, what this guy's saying to me, what he's not saying to me, how he's talking to me, his whole body language. It was easier for me to think, okay, that input, now I'm sure there was something in that, because I had something to benchmark it against. I had someone else's experience saying, look, these are some of the signs to look out for. So for me, that was really impactful. And obviously since that, I've certainly had moments where I've seen that again. Now, would I have known that without having the interaction with Hear Us? Probably not. Probably not. The sad thing is that this is only, the Hear Us experience is only part of the hostage and crisis negotiator course. So it's a fraction, an absolute fraction of serving police officers. For my money, what I'd like to see is a much bigger rollout of a programme. And I don't mean that in a, how can I put it, in a kind of like just another tick box exercise, but I think more, I suppose, pollination of, look, this is what's going on within communities, this is how we're responding to it, what more can we do? And have a look at yourself for it and have a look at how you react to it. Because unless you've had some personal experience of mental health illness, as a police officer, the first time you're going to come across it is in a professional capacity. And you don't always know how you're going to respond. You just don't. So for me, it was a great step up. So, okay, so this guy is saying this to me, and I know from what I've heard from the Hear Us input that this could be. So it definitely helped to inform my judgment on how I communicated with him, definitely. And I'm sure that would be the same for many, many other negotiators.
Great. So just quickly on that point then, I guess, how valuable do you think it would be to other sections of the police, particularly the Met, I suppose, because that's where we are.
Yeah.
To have an expanded mental health training, do you think that could make, how big of a difference do you think that could make?
Yeah, sure, but I think we need to give it some context. I mean, I think all police services need to evolve. I think like education needs to evolve, mental health needs to evolve. And I think what would be helpful is to have a look at our training and say, okay, how much now, knowing that a third of our calls minimum have got a mental health aspect, does our basic training reflect that? Because if it doesn't, I think there's a bit of a disconnect there. So I think just looking at it from a kind of statistical perspective, I think we possibly need to review what we're training and to evolve with working with mental health. Nobody knows, but I suspect that the more you know about a subject, the better you become at it. So I think the more we know about how mental health is for everybody, how it manifests itself, what people's needs are, the best way that we can interact with people, what not to do, because sometimes there's things not to do. I think the gains would be significant. Many of the time we get an individual who will come back to notice. And of course we'll give them all the time that they absolutely need. But I wonder if there's a break in the system somewhere where we could actually put in an intervention. I don't think intervention is the right word, but we could do more sooner. And I wonder if we don't, partly as a police service, but partly as a much wider society. I wonder if we don't because we don't know how. I wonder if that's where the disconnect is.
So I think what you're saying is like preventative measures as opposed to reactive ones.
Yeah, I think if you look at the students who come onto the hostage and crisis negotiator course, normally, and certainly in London you have to be a certain rank, and with that you will have a certain level of service, you would have had a certain level of exposure to policing over a period of time. And for you to get on this course, you will have a certain level of communication skills. Okay, that's a given. But what about all those people who don't get on that course, and of which there's thousands of them? And these thousands of officers will be the frontline officers who are interacting in the first case, in the first instance, with mental health crisis. So for me, I think we're almost missing a trick. We're training some people up to a very, very high standard and a very successful standard, but it's the tip of the iceberg. And I wonder if we could do more training with a wider audience, and part of that training would absolutely incorporate, I say Hear Us, but I'm sure there's many other groups, because I'm sure Hear Us would be spread too thinly. But for me, I think that's potentially where the direction of travel needs to go. It's not, do you know something? It's not a specialist subject. It's really not. Everybody can be engaging in this. Everybody can be talking to people who have got mental health illness. And it's just a question of, do we know how?